Alright, this one's gonna be rough, so just bear with me. I'm gonna try not to be all over the place, but this is probably the deepest topic that I'm covering, and it's one that is very personal to me once again. I'm sure you guys all know, as Charlie Brown says,
Good grief.
grief is something that everyone experiences, yet everyone experiences it in their own personal way. And let me just start off by saying grief is not exactly something that you just get over. It's kind of something that you learn to just work through and to make a part of you as a person going forward. But getting over it is not always something that's going to happen. It will be possible, but in some cases it's just impossible to get over that grief. So it's something that you just have to learn to work with and move forward on. It doesn't even have to be death specific when talking about grief. It can involve other things like losing your job, falling out of a relationship with someone, whether it be your girlfriend or just a really good friend that you've known for a long time, or even just having something precious or priceless break, etc. These are all things that you can grieve over that don't have to be exactly death specific. These are also often extremely difficult to deal with in the same manner as death, but obviously not to the same degree. You can also experience grief on a grander scale. This is formally, or in nerd terms, known as collective grief. I won't even really be covering that in this video at all, but just so you know, I guess that is existent and it is something that you may experience. One really great example of collective grief right now actually would be the TikTok ban. If you're grieving that, you're not alone. Like I said earlier, grief can come in many different forms for different people, and it can also affect them in different ways and to different degrees. Now, almost a decade ago at this point, my brother was killed, and it is something that I still think about pretty frequently. But when I do grieve him, I shut down, and I kind of just keep a lot of my thoughts to myself in my own head, and I just grieve in my own manner. While this can be negative sometimes, it also definitely can lead to introspection, and me personally, I really love introspective thoughts, especially when it comes to my late brother. I really appreciate those times. Now, my brother and I got along and we bonded a lot over different things, primarily Pokemon and XXXTentacion, but my sister was his #1 fan. I mean, they were absolute best friends, and she is younger than me, so when she grieves him, she makes sure to let it out. Although he is both of our brother, we grieve his loss in our own ways, and there is nothing wrong with that, because there's absolutely no right way to grieve a loss. There isn't a timeline, there's no guidelines or rule book that is given to you on the right way to grieve. You just kind of learn as you go in your own way. Like I said, it really oftentimes doesn't go away. It's just something that you learn to adapt to. There's this thing called waves of grief, and I'll tell you firsthand, a decade later, you'll still feel the waves the same way that you did when you first started grieving the loss. Whether it's an anniversary, a birthday, a random location that just triggers back a memory, a small little ripple can be extremely overwhelming, and it can just cause you to grieve. Even if there was no precursor in that day, in that month even, to bring the thought back out. Literally the other day I was scrolling TikTok. The exact context of the video is not coming up, but it was talking about your late brother, and I instantly thought about mine. And every time that I do think about him, I go back through all of the different thoughts, even if it wasn't directly involving him, just different memories when I was younger. And while this is a sad thing to think about, it also is somewhat nostalgic, and it brings me comfort to know that I got to experience those times. This sounds really corny, but if you've grieved a hard loss before, you understand exactly where I'm coming from. Like I said, 8 years later, I'm not moved on at all. I still miss my brother every single day, but it's not about moving on, it's about moving forward. You really don't ever get over your grief. You just kind of find a way to carry the baggage. And although baggage sounds like a bad word, this can actually lead to a growth in yourself and one's individual understanding for life and the kind of different meanings that it has. Nothing is permanent, nothing is promised. Every single day that you're here is an actual blessing. Again, I know it sounds corny. It's the absolute truth, whether you like it or not. Moving forward doesn't exactly even have to mean forgetting about the past or forgetting your grief. It can be mending that grief and using it for positive. Like I said earlier, my brother is the one that actually got me into Pokemon, and he got me into a specific Pokemon clicker game. I quit it for a while, but I came back to it during the lockdown. Every single time I get on the game, I think about him, and although I'm grieving it, I'm happy that I get to kind of play the game and think of him, that he's still with me. So he's actually the one who literally made my account, so any single form or way that I can keep myself connected to him, going to do it. Grief obviously is something that is extremely difficult to deal with. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but it affects everyone differently. It's important to understand that asking for help and trying to get support for helping you understand your own grief, or just kind of pushing you through it, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But grief ultimately is a personal journey, and honestly, the number one healer to grief is always going to be time. I know you've heard that before, but it is the truth. That may not get better, but over time you're going to be able to learn how to adapt and push through again and grow into a new person with the grief by your side. Again, it doesn't even have to be talking about death. When I made the decision to finally stop playing football for my university, I actually went through a lot of grief during that time and process, just because I had a very direct, strong connection to football. I loved football, still love football, but there comes a time and a place, and there was that time and place that was present, and I needed to kind of just call it a day. I'd already tore my ACL once in my junior year of high school. I was probably centimeters away from tearing it again my sophomore year. So as much as it was painful and as much as I really wanted to keep going, I had to stop playing, and without a doubt that made me grieve. I still do grieve the fact that I wasn't able to finish, because I would have been able to play my last season this fall. But over time I've come to terms with the fact that it was more than likely the better route to kind of just call it quits and save my knees for the future. Because if I had to get another surgery, full ACL repairment surgery might I add, my knees were going to be more screwed than they already were. That's kind of the new angle that I've been able to take at this grief and turn it around into a positive outlook. I really do apologize also for this video being kind of like a trauma dump, I guess. Didn't really intend for that to be the purpose, but I also was intending for this series to get a little bit more personal, you guys to know a little bit more about me, and kind of to give you guys some serious, I guess, life lessons, and without personal context or examples directly from my own life, it's kind of hard to paint a picture. But again, understand, grief doesn't even have to involve death. It doesn't have to revolve anything around death. It can involve losing a job, a friend, anything like that. I just use death for my example because it's probably the most prevalent and prominent form of grief, and it's something that probably every single person on earth will experience at some point or another. Okay, let's just take a second at the end here to clarify. Grief absolutely sucks. If we could have a world without grief, it would be a better world. But I think grief is important to helping yourself grow as an individual without completely being stopped in your tracks for the rest of your life. There are certain cases for sure of grief hitting someone so hard that it literally stops them in their own tracks in life. But for the most part, grief can be a very valuable and painful aspect of life that I think is important to at least understand, because everyone will go through grief at some point or another. So being able to understand it in yourself better is definitely extremely important.